Parnelli Jones led the 1961 Indianapolis 500 for 27 laps before a crash kicked up debris that struck him in the face, cracking his goggles and cutting his forehead. Parnelli kept racing as blood slowly filled his goggles. He finished in 12th place.
I was long gone. I mean, it was the first year I ran 150 miles an hour around here, the first one. We had a tremendous lead and everything else, and I lost the brakes. So came in a little bit faster, and obviously I had to run over my tires that were laid out for me, and I rubbed it up against the wall.
Parnelli would finish in 7th place.
Okay, so Parnelli, in 1963, what was your expectation going into it? Did you think you were going to win the race this time?
Yeah, I really did.
This is hallowed ground. This is the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the famous Brickyard. They've been racing the Indy 500 here now for 100 years. But today is a very special day for me personally, because I'm about to take my first ever laps of this famous track. What's more, I'm about to take those laps in Parnelli Jones's old Calhoun, the car that won the 1963 Indy 500, a race I regard as the greatest 500 of them all.
There is something eerie about being at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway any time but the month of May. You can almost hear the ghosts whispering in the deserted garages and empty stands. The cheering fans who've been coming here for 100 years. The hard-working mechanics. And, of course, the drivers, some of whom paid the ultimate price for their bravery and determination to win the great race. This place has a soul all its own, from a century of racing history that seeped into the wood and metal, and, of course, the 2.5-mile track itself. Ah yes, the track. 4 straights connected by 4 corners. It looks deceptively simple. It was completed in the spring of 1909 with a gravel and tar racing surface. But 6 months later, officials decided the original surface wasn't durable enough and repaved it with 3.2 million bricks. Drivers called it the Brickyard. Today, only a yard of brick remains, marking the finish line. It's Indy's most direct, most visceral link with 100 years of racing tradition. The first Indianapolis 500 race took place in 1911 and was originally called the International Sweepstakes. Ray Haroon, driving a Marmon Wasp, won the race at an average speed of 74.6 miles per hour. Haroon drove alone, fitting a rear view mirror to silence rivals who argued that racing without a riding mechanic would be dangerous.
Innovation has been a part of the Indianapolis 500 from the very beginning.
Indy has showcased plenty of technical innovation and experimentation since. Twin cams and 4 valves per cylinder engines in 1913, front drive in 1925, a 6-wheel racer in 1948. A Cummins turbo diesel-powered car even sat on pole for the 1952 race. When old Calhoun rolled out of race car builder A.J. Watson's small shop in Glendale, California in early 1960s, it was state-of-the-art for an Indy car.
By the early 1950s, the winning formula at Indy had become, well, formulaic. Offenhauser-engined roadsters like these dominated the Brickyard for more than a decade.
8 of the 33 cars in the 1960 500 were Watsons. 8 were built by his LA rival Frank Curtis. All had the same rugged tube frame construction, and most had simple beam axles front and rear that were evolutions of the traditional dirt track racer setup dating back to before World War II. All 33 cars were powered by the 4-cylinder 252 cubic inch Mayer Drake Offenhauser engine that was originally designed in the 1930s. and most ran a 2-speed transmission built from Model A Ford parts. Compared with the light and nimble rear-engine Grand Prix racers built in Britain by John Cooper and Colin Chapman the same year, they were, in technical terms, frontline racing cars from another era. Dinosaurs. The 1963 500 would be old Calhoun's 4th start in the race. Maybe this time he'd take the ball. But there was revolution in the air at the Brickyard that year, for there, on the second row of the grid for America's great race, was a tiny, dainty cigar-shaped car with an aluminum monocoque chassis, fully independent suspension all round, and a 4.2-litre production block Ford V8 bolted to the rear of the car. Jones led the 33-car field on the parade lap that Memorial Day 48 years ago, after taking pole position with a record 151.153 mile-per-hour qualifying lap. Scotsman Jim Clark had qualified the Colin Chapman designed Lotus at 149.750 miles per hour, good enough to start in 5th position. At the start of the race, though, it was Jones's best friend, Jim Hurtubise, doing all he could to earn the upset, overtaking Jones twice early on in his fan favourite Curtis Novi. But Clark's little Lotus was the bigger threat. While the Lotus couldn't match old Calhoun's raw speed, it was much easier on fuel and tyres, requiring just one pit stop on the 95th lap, whereas Jones had to stop 3 times on laps 64, 128 and 162. In exactly 22 seconds, the crew would change the tyres and chug 75 gallons of methanol into old Calhoun's fuel tank. Jones's win was a nail-biter. Clark closed to within 8 seconds of old Calhoun, and with 10 laps to go, a crack in the externally mounted oil tank left the 98's tail smeared in oil and drivers spinning in its wake. Had car owner J.C. Agajanian not somehow talked Indy Chief Steward Harlan Fengler out of waving the black flag, the gifted Scotsman would have taken the checker instead. On the 4 occasions Parnelli Jones drove number 98 at the Brickyard, he led the race. But the car let him down 3 times, and almost a 4th. Maybe old Calhoun just didn't want the son of a bitch.
Now stay tuned for the greatest spectacle in racing.
Parnelli's win in 1963 would have a lasting impact on the legendary racer. He tells it like it was.
Well, what made that car so good? What made the Watson Roadster special?
First of all, the Watson Roadsters were very good, even the ones that were built before this one and some even after. In fact, most of them were built after this one because this ran 1 year before I drove it with Lloyd Ruby. I don't know, it just seemed to fit me well and fit the car, and I seem to enjoy the track, and sometimes all these things come together and seem to do that with me and that particular car.
So talk us through the opening lap of the race.
Well, when we came down for the start, Hurt was second quick start in the middle of the second row, and when we came down for the start, all of a sudden I seen him fade back. And what happened? His car jumped out of gear. He got it back in gear. And I saw the film later, and he passed everybody on the outside, came out of turn 2 running second. At the end of the back straightaway, he came back by me, and because I know I had a lot of power. And of course, then we traded back and forth the lead. I could pass him across the short chutes and even out off the corner, but at the end of the back straightaway, he led the first lap, and which was no big deal really, but I knew that if I could ever run 2 corners without him getting by me, he probably couldn't catch me again. So
Right.
basically that's what happened.
So with the oil tank, you almost outsmarted yourself. I mean, you'd made an aluminum tank specially for the race.
Well, we kept trying to improve the car every year, and so we built a light aluminum oil tank that goes on the side. And right in the middle of the tank, there was two studs that held the tank on, and it cracked a little bit around there. So when that happened, all that oil that came out of the thing came onto my left rear tire. My car kept getting sideways and jumping sideways, and so I just, I didn't know exactly. I seen the puff of smoke, and pretty soon it quit. And I picked up the pace again and quit sliding around. In fact, the last lap I ran was one of the quickest laps I run all day long. And the track had been oily all day anyway, so there was a couple of cars that run completely out of oil. And some of the other drivers were moaning and groaning like it was all my fault because, obviously I did drop some oil. Well, I had no idea they were even thinking about black flagging me.
Right.
This was a problem because I'd picked the pace back up, started pulling away again, and because they were giving me the times on the board and stuff like that, distance between first and second. That was the main thing, and I could see that I was increasing that, so I didn't think I had anything to worry about.
So what did it feel like when you saw the checkered flag come out?
Well, it's an unbelievable feeling. I mean, especially after having an opportunity 2 years in a row to win, even before, and coming close, or having a car that I was capable of doing that. And it was just hard to believe. It was very difficult for me to accept at first. I mean, it's one of the happiest days of my life, obviously. And I went to bed that night about probably 1 o'clock or something, and woke up about 3 and run into the bathroom and looked in the mirror and make sure I wasn't dreaming. That sort of thing, so it was a big thrill for me.
After talking with Parnelli Jones, the sense of history at Indy feels thicker than before. The ghosts are back. I can almost hear their footsteps. My knees are knocking and my heart is pounding. And I haven't even sat in old Calhoun yet. Who am I to drive the car that even the great Parnelli Jones struggled to tame? Thankfully, I've made a new friend who's willing to show me the ropes.
When you go to take off, it's got a 2-speed gearbox in it.
Yep.
And forward is first,
Yep.
and back is second in the final drive, actually. And you want to get it in the final drive as soon as you can, but the clutch is kind of touchy, so you have to really release it real gentle.
Yep.
And you'll get a feel for it, I'm sure. You've raced enough that you'll pick that up in a hurry. But when they start it, you got to pump the throttle there until it gets the fuel flowing into the injectors. And
Now I'm told that these offies don't like idling. You tend to break timing gears on them if you let them idle.
well, yeah, they don't like to be run too slow, actually. Right. And of course, you have to bring them down to get them in gear.
Yep.
But other than that, you keep the revs up a little bit. Keep on and off the throttle. It helps a lot.
Tell you the truth, I think just getting this thing out of pit lane is what's worrying me most. I mean, every race car I've ever driven, that's the hardest part.
Yeah.
I don't want to stall it.
Right. Well, I feel the same way. When you go out, I don't want to embarrass myself by killing the engine out of the pits. But
it's nice to know you feel like that.
It's easy to do that. And of course, once you've done it, once you get a feel for it, it comes around. But
so we've got much lower gears in this car than when you were running it. That makes it a lot easier for me.
Well, actually, it makes it easier getting in and out of the pits more than anything. I mean, because we're obviously not going to run it like I did it in 1963, but it's pretty simple. And once you get it in high gear, it just takes off, and you can feel the torque that it has.
Yeah, it seems amazing that in 1963 you had a race car with only 2 gears in it.
Yeah.
It just seems incredible
You had a live front axle and a live rear axle, yet you've got disc brakes on it. It's this weird combination of old and new technology.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. I mean, obviously, when you don't know any better, you think you got the ultimate. But obviously, the solid axle in the rear, I think was, there ain't much better than you could do around here. Even, you can work a little more and then making them handle if you have independent rear suspension and stuff like that. But I kind of like a solid axle.
Well, it's an irreplaceable, precious relic. It's a car that's very near and dear to my heart, and you're about to let me go out. And any advice?
Well, just don't wreck it. I know you won't, but you're just going out and do your thing.
Well, here we go.
Now stay tuned for the greatest spectacle in racing.
And we're off. Just me, an old Calhoun, and a track that's seen history being made for 100 years now. I dreamed about driving this car when I was 8 years old, and my boyhood fantasies have come true. The rock-hard rubber is riddled with a million cracks and the sidewalls are fraying in a few places. I'll be taking it easy. My hands are tingling. The engine is bolted directly to the Watson frame, and while it might only be a four-banger, those bangs are truly titanic. In deference to the engine's age and fragile tyres, I'm limited to 3,500 RPM, 70 to 80 miles an hour with the low axle gears the mechanics have installed. That's barely half the speed Parnelli averaged around here to put old Calhoun on pole in 1963, when the car ran well over 180 miles an hour down the long chutes. Even at cruising speed, old Calhoun's Hallebrand worm and sector steering is remarkably communicative and surprisingly delicate, and that long view over the hood helps you aim the car precisely into the turns. Although my head sticks out a lot farther into the slipstream than Parnelli's, there is remarkably little buffeting. Even so, it's an overwhelmingly visceral experience driving this old roadster around this storied track. The exhaust snarling in my left ear, the steering wheels buzzing in my hands, and if I look over my right shoulder, the rear tyres humming right there. There's also a constant ticking from the Offie's valve train and grits peppering my face. It's truly wonderful. But here I am, doing my best to drive the same lines Parnelli used to hold off Jimmy Clark's Lotus, though travelling at roughly the speed Ray Harroun averaged to win the very first 500 a century ago. I can only imagine what it must have felt like to average more than 150 miles an hour, as Parnelli did in 1963, just lifting off the gas and not touching the brakes into the turns to keep old Calhoun on a steady line. I think of all the ghosts here at Indy, and I realise that on this day I've become a tiny part of the collection of memories that haunt the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. I just hope I haven't let any of them down. That was one of the most incredible experiences of my life. I mean, my hands are still tingling, my knees are still knocking. I can't quite believe I've driven this car around the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. An incredible sensation. Parnelli, I hope I did okay by you.
You liked it, huh?
With Parnelli's approval, the weight is lifted.
Now stay tuned for the greatest spectacle in racing.
Parnelli Jones would only race in Old Calhoun once more after his '63 win. But his 1964 race ended early when a fire erupted while pulling away from a pit stop. The '64 race would be the last time a front-engine roadster would win the Indy 500. The rear-engine revolution had arrived, and Parnelli would come within 3 laps of winning the 1967 500 in a futuristic wedge-shaped four-wheel drive racer powered by a gas turbine engine. A car more technically sophisticated than anything running on Europe's Grand Prix tracks at the time. But with 4 laps remaining, a simple gearbox bearing failure would quash his chance at a second victory.
After 100 years, the Indianapolis 500 is still one of the world's greatest auto races. They've seen a lot of change here at the Brickyard during that century, but I'll always regard 1963 as a pivotal year, the year in which the Indy 500 began to make its transition from tradition to modernity. Old Calhoun, perhaps the quintessential front-engined Indy roadster, and the car in which Parnelli Jones led 4 consecutive Indy 500s, still has a special place in his heart.